Welcome to the MadMat Salon, where we meet and have conversations with masters. About 2 years ago, a Trager colleague of mine said, "You got to check out this girl's website." So I went online and I looked at her website, and she wrote about the fact that she was an empath. And I immediately said, I have to meet her. So fortunately, she came back to the country from living abroad, and I was able to get with her pretty quickly, had an opportunity to be in a workshop with her. And I went right up to her and I introduced myself and I said, "I'm an empath, and I see that you are too, and I need to work with you." I had this feeling that she really had figured out how to work with this as a gift and integrate it into her work, and I wanted to learn, to integrate it into my work more. So, without any further ado, if you would, let's give a warm round of applause for Kate Rose. So Kate, will you explain to some people here who might not know what an empath is, how would you describe an empath?
From my perspective, being an empath, it's the experience of feeling other people's feelings directly. And I separate feeling from emotion, so that feeling is a sensation, a quality of being, and emotion can be a response or reaction to that. So my gift, if you will, is being able to, I feel feelings the way people see colors is probably a good way to describe it. It's just normal. And as a child and as a young adult, I thought everyone did. It just was normal to me. And it came as a huge shock to discover that I was weird and everyone else was normal, So it took a long time to discover how to separate my feelings from other people's feelings, so I knew what was mine and what was yours. And then developing it as a skill and as a tool to use in healing.
So I grew up in that very same way, feeling other people's feelings, feeling everybody's feelings in the house, and not realizing that they weren't my feelings. How did you come to the awareness that they weren't your feelings?
I think the first thing was the feeling that I knew they weren't mine. It was clear to me. I mean, the first memory I have is as a 4-year-old. I was sitting in my parents' living room, and there was a lady visiting. My mother was sitting in a chair across from her, and as a little child, I was sitting on the floor. And I know it wasn't a friend of my mother. It was an acquaintance because of the way they were talking. And my mother said to her, as you do, "How are you?" And she said, "Fine." And when she said fine, I went like that because I knew she wasn't fine. I could feel it. And she saw me do it, and she looked at me and got very frightened, and then it just went past because I was a 4-year-old. What did I know? But that was my first memory of knowing what someone was feeling. And I don't think I perceived that I thought, well, she's not telling the truth, So I think the awareness was that it was someone else's was there for me. What I couldn't do was not feel it, so I felt responsible. Mm-hmm. So, and that's often something that empathic people feel. If you know it, if you can feel it, you must have done something to cause it, And the other side of that is if you feel good, I feel good, So I'm going to make you feel better, and then I'll feel better. And that is the draining part of being an empath, is that you tend to do that. One tends to do that.
Taking responsibility for
someone else's feeling. It's like the ultimate codependent relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I first started to teach yoga, I would get the injury or the illness of every person in the room, and then I would have to figure out how to make myself better.
Right.
And that was sort of the basis for how I started to learn how to really teach better, I think. And you said you had a similar kind of a...
well, I used to get sick all the time because I was processing it. It would literally come through me. I had no filter system. Boundaries would have been, I didn't even know how to spell it. What is a boundary? I'd never heard of it. Because a boundary is very different than a wall. A boundary is a limit. But everything, there was just no filter system. I was the filter system. So it just came through me all the time. And it would make me very, very sick. And it wasn't until I would say even recently, in the last 10 years maybe, where I began to figure out how to release it once it was in me. I still hadn't figured out how to not have it come right through me. And then when I was living in France, I got to a point where I was so exhausted and so utterly drained that I thought, that's it, I'm done. I can't, it's over, I've used it up. And then the next morning I had a very powerful experience that led me down a road to actually learn how to have a rather phenomenal filter system so that it wasn't going to kill me, because I was using up my physical strength working with the people that I was working with.
Was that the experience with the sun?
No, that was a different one.
Oh, what was this?
This is a Divine Mother experience. Do you want me to share that?
Oh, well, let me just say this, and then you can clarify. So,
Okay.
Kate grew up in a Jewish household, but she always had an affinity toward the Divine Mother, which is fascinating to me because I grew up in a Catholic household, and my mother also was like always talking about the Blessed Mother, and I just kind of never got it. Like, what's the Blessed Mother? Why is she so important? So I'm kind of curious. I do want you to talk about that Divine Mother connection, and then you can tell the experience about your friends.
Well, yeah, as a child, I was fascinated with the church. There was a playground that we used to play in, and there was a Our Lady of Fatima church next to it. And everybody would be playing on the swings, and I would sneak into the church. And in the daytime, churches are often empty, And there were all these beautiful statues and angels, and I didn't know who anybody was, but I would just stand there going, I was totally happy. And of course, no one would tell me anything about it because I was growing up in a Jewish household. And I discovered that it was Christ and Mother Mary, and of course went to Sunday school at the temple and said, what about Christ? What is Christ? And of course they won't tell you anything. So he was a Jew that kind of went the wrong way or something. You hear these really weird stories, but something in me knew it was something else. So that was the beginning, really. And then when I was, I guess, I was about 15 when I really consciously started my spiritual path. And again, I went to my rabbi because I knew that there was a Kabbalah and I knew that there was some kind of mystical Judaism. And my rabbi wouldn't tell me. He thought, you shouldn't know that stuff, So that actually was what turned me. The next thing I found, I think, was Alan Watts and The Way of Zen, and discovered the pairs of opposites, and I was so relieved. I was like, oh God, light, dark, I get it. It was very nice. And then when I was maybe 18, the man that later became my husband gave me the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Is anyone familiar with Ramakrishna? He was a saint in India in the mid-1800s that some considered an avatar. He was a very unusual being, and part of what was so extraordinary about him was that he created a structure where it didn't matter what religion you were, what God you believed in, that it all led to the same place, and he himself practiced every religion that there was and reached the same level of conscious awareness, realization through it. Once that was given to me, I started having a lot of experiences. And of course, Ramakrishna's focus was Divine Mother. And that was my introduction to the concept, if you will, or the reality. And I just went for it. It was totally resonated with my being in the deepest way. And Mother has been, and then I gave I gave myself to her. I just dedicated myself to that when I was quite young. Which, looking back, and of course Divine Mother for Ramakrishna was Mother Kali. I think I might go for Durga or Lakshmi next time. Mother Kali is a pretty heavy-duty mother to have,
You should probably say a word about that.
It's just a particular deity, the form of the deity. I experience. Swami Vivekananda once said, he was speaking to Nivedita, who was his direct disciple, and he was saying to her, she was complaining about something. She was having a hard time, and he wasn't someone that you could complain to very easily. And he said to her, if Mother doesn't bring you anything, just be glad that she leaves you alone, because she can be a hard taskmaster. there's just different forms. I have a very dear friend who's been very connected with Mother Durga, and it's kind of a different experience. But for me, it's really simply the reference point of everything is Mother. And
So it's like the mother archetype energy. Is that how you experience your connection?
Swamiji, what could you say about Divine Mother? In some way, it's the creator, the creative force of the universe. It's like if you come from undifferentiated consciousness where there's just everything, there's a point where it comes into creation. And Mother kind of, from my experience, lives there. There's so many aspects of it in the sense of the aspect of the mother herself and the aspect of your relationship with it. It's really about what your relationship with God is, whatever form of God you believe in, whatever spirit calls you. For me, it's this spirit, and because of my own experiences, direct experiences of Mother making her presence very known in my life. And it's a very familiar, it's really like my mother, but it happens to be the Divine Mother of the universe, and I talk to her the same way I talk to you, and I scream and yell and do all kinds of things, Mother!
So how did she influence your journey as an empath?
Well, at one point, I can only say it like this, she offered to be the filter system. You understand? And finally, because I got to a point where I was close to death. I was very weakened and very completely drained. I had literally used myself up. And I was living in France, and I went home. I was living in this beautiful village in the south of France in this gigantic old farmhouse. And I would do my teaching and my healing work, and then I'd come back and sort of collapse for a couple of months and recover. And then, and this wasn't a great way to be, but that's how it was. And at one point, I had used it up. I had just used up. I had no more reserves. And I came home. I said, Mother, I think this is it. I think I'm finished. And if you want me on the planet, you better do something, because I'm done. And I can't believe I'm telling this on film. Is this all right? Is it all right? It's okay, right? Okay. You're taught, I was taught very young, you don't really discuss your spiritual experiences, but I guess this is the moment. Right, okay. I woke up in the morning and I was lying on my bed completely flat on my back, and I was singing at the top of my lungs. My mouth was like wide open in a voice that was very different than my normal singing voice, which is usually more high. And I was singing, for all you Catholics, the Hail Holy Queen prayer. Is anybody else Catholic? Which is a very, very beautiful prayer of the Rosary that I learned many, many years ago, but a friend of mine who's an incredible musician and singer had set it to music. And I never sang it because it was really hard to sing. And there I was, laying flat on my back, singing this at the top of my lungs. And one part of
dead sleep.
From a dead sleep at 5 in the morning. I wake up and that's where I am. And I'm laying there. And so there was this part of me that was sort of watching it going, wow, it's going to be a really interesting day. And the other part said, don't drive. That was it. So it went on, and I was in the state of ecstasy. I was laughing, I was crying, and it was like Mother just was basically there. And I went through the day, and there were a series of things that happened. And through that experience, I connected with someone who also has a very, very deep Divine Mother connection, is an incredible healer. And was just given, it was like a download, I was given all of this information, and it was the way that I am staying alive. It completely changed my nervous system, it changed the way that I work, it changed just the way that I perceive, because the feelings are, everything's still there, but it doesn't cause me pain anymore. There's a point, and then it connects with that other experience where I woke up and I had this sun coming out of my chest. It was like a full sun, and I thought, I wonder if this can hurt anybody, because it seemed really strong. And I wanted to talk to a friend of mine who's a teacher and had had a lot of experiences, and so I had no way to get a hold of him because I was living in France, he was living in Utah, and he didn't give private appointments anymore. 3 hours later, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in quite some time emailed me from Chicago to say, Bill is going to be on the internet tonight at such and such a time, and you can ask a question. So I thought, great, that's what I want. So it was a very powerfully guided thing, and I wanted to know how you can live in the world with a completely open heart all the time, wide open. And I was able to understand because that's been my path, it's the heart path. And when you have your being open to that degree, which as an empath is fairly automatic, you feel pain all the time because there's a lot of pain in the universe, in the world, and on this planet. And you get used to a certain level of pain. Well, maybe sometimes you don't. A lot of empaths go crazy or commit suicide or become alcoholics or drug addicts because it's too much to feel. It's just too much to feel. And that's when it shifted. It shifted from a certain level of pain that could be quite physical to I don't have that. And there's just this amazing feeling, the heart feeling. And that's when my work shifted into constantly just focusing on the heart, everyone's heart. I understood that if you connect with the heart, you can connect with everything else pretty easily.
So do you see the energy of people's hearts when you look around the room? Is that something that is a way that it comes to you? Is it a feeling inside of your body?
I kind of experience that it's all like one big heart, like we just think that we're separate, you know? And so it's much more of a feeling, you feel it, yeah. It's much more of a feeling of the total interconnectedness and the oneness. That's the feeling I have. It's a feeling of oneness. And yeah, not separate. Does that make sense? Yeah, see, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, so we may have some empaths in the room.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
So you use this term when you describe yourself, and I've heard you use it when you describe some other people. They're a full empath.
Ah, that's a wonderful question. Everyone has empathy. Every human being, it's a natural thing to have. We don't get to use it as much as perhaps would be wonderful because we live in a fairly linear culture that doesn't really give a lot of credit to that. Everyone has a certain level of empathy, and a lot of people can turn it on, can turn it off. It's limited, you feel this, but you don't feel that. A full empath feels everything from everybody all the time. It really is like colors. It's not, it's just normal. There's an extra sound, there's an extra note that you're hearing all the time. Yeah, because I've met a lot of different empaths, and there are different levels, and every once in a while I meet another full empath.
And you can feel what their level of empathic ability is? You have that?
It's like another language, you know, it's like empathy or being empathic is another language. Like my first language is not speech. My first language is feeling. And then it gets translated into speech. So when I meet another empath, just as we had that experience, there's this instant like, you know, and there's a lot, if you're willing, there's an amazing amount of communication that can happen without any words at all.
So do you think when people either are not in contact with the fact that they have this gift, or if they are but it's too uncomfortable and they kind of shut it down, that they could be unaware of that ability in themselves?
Initially it's not received as an ability. It's received like a curse. I mean, it's a really hard thing to be.
Yeah.
And most of the people that I meet, that I end up working with in workshops and things, are in terrible pain because of it. Either because they've absorbed so much and they don't know how to run it through or to clear it, that they're saturated. Or it's just this, you know, like going into a room with 25 televisions and they're all on at the same time. They cannot filter it. Now, I have the gift of being able to step in between. In other words, if I'm working with someone and they're in a lot of pain from it, I actually can act as a filter. It's just part of the gift
between
that I have.
them and their pain?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
And then it shifts. Because as soon as you can get under the pain, so to speak, then you understand that there's still a choice, and then there's processes to clear it.
So is that like the Trager approach work, or did that begin you on the process of learning how to do that for people?
I became a Trager practitioner almost 30 years ago. I was a ballet dancer, and I had a spinal injury, and it was what began to heal my body. And when it began to heal my body, I got interested in the work, and went to what was in those days a beginning training, and I saw a video of Dr. Trager, Milton. And as soon as I saw him, I said, this man knows what feeling is. I have to be with him. I knew he had a gift for me, and I knew he knew what feeling was. So my entire motivation in becoming a Trager practitioner was to be with Milton. I had no interest in doing body work. Meanwhile, I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've been teaching it as an instructor for the last 15 around the world. It gave me a pathway to use my gift. And from that point, I moved on with it, because Milton always just talked about feeling. You just feel it, and it's taken me years to understand what he was talking about. He'd put his hands on someone's body and he'd go, well, and I'm thinking, well, what? What is he talking about? And then I found myself, some years ago going, well, like, whoa, now I know you're listening. You're just listening all the time. And so my pathway, my trajectory in Trager, both as a practitioner and as an instructor, was into the feeling world. And as I began to go deeper and trust it more and more, to see that what I was feeling was real, to see the effect that my gift had on people, I then developed what I called the choice to feel. And that was when I began teaching about it. And really, without a clue what I was doing. I was in Egypt teaching a Trager training, and I had just decided, okay, I'm going to do the choice to feel, and I'm just going to say yes to it, whatever happens. When you say those kind of things, and then the universe comes in and goes, you're doing this, and you go, no, I didn't mean that. So my friend said to me, we were having a break between two trainings, and she said, we'll do a Trager intro. I said, fine. And she goes, no, we're not going to do a Trager intro. You're going to do an evening of choice to feel. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
So a Trager intro is like a very specific thing in the Trager world. Only certain people are allowed to do it, right? And it's basically like, it's not like a training, but it's like introducing the general public to what the Trager approach really is about.
Yeah.
So, but that's a term.
It's a term, a Trager intro, right, introduction to the Trager approach. So she said, no, we'll do a choice to feel evening. And 25 people showed up, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I had never done it before. It was very much like those dreams you have when you suddenly find yourself on stage with no script and no lines and no costume. Yeah, you've been there. Isn't that horrible? And I thought, this is the moment that I have to go into total trust, total surrender, and really open and allow this and say what I am in public. Say to people, I'm an empath and I can feel what you feel and I asked each person permission. Say, do I have permission to feel you? Everybody said yes. And I get to this one woman and she goes, yeah, go ahead. Like that, And I said to her, are you sure? And then she realized that it was true. And then she said yes. And that's always amazed me. And I found it very challenging, but everyone really liked it, and that was my step into it. And from that point on, I was supported by some amazing people in Holland.
So you basically just went around the room feeling and telling them what you were feeling?
Well, it was a mixture. It's like if we did it here, I would just, I ask if I have permission, because then it's like I'm opening a window with each person. If I don't receive permission, I keep that window closed. So I have a certain... It's almost like a fragrance, that person smells like a rose, but I'm not going to actually look and see what color the rose is. I'm keeping a distance. Usually what happened in the early days was I would just get pulled to somebody, Or in fact, that evening I remember there was a point where I was just sitting like this. And I suddenly said, I have my hand on my head. Why do I have my hand on my head? And I said, does somebody have a headache? And someone had a terrible headache, so that was what I worked with. But it was, at that point, I was letting everything in. And that was what started to really...
deteriorate you.
Yeah.
It's pretty brutal.
So it's been an interesting path, of learning.
Learning how to protect yourself and
learning how to
still
clear
do your work.
And how to clear my own field. How to totally clear my own field.
There's a piece of writing that you did that I feel, pardon me while I read, the deeper the surrender to the practice of letting go, of falling into the infinite, the more fluid the process of eternal change. It lessens the feeling of attachment to place, time, to the idea that the outer reality represents stability, I think that's a really pivotal thing. This, of course, is a challenging practice, as at the same time, it seems natural to have a deep desire for stability. The physical system itself contains a righting reflex, an action of the inner stability and natural equilibrium of the human system. The body itself is constantly moving from balance to imbalance and back again. I was particularly taken with that part about the idea that the outer reality represents stability and how we think that, and we look to the outer reality for stability. But any part of that I just read that you would want
catches
to
my attention.
share about. Yeah.
It's reflecting an experience that I began to have that I called falling into the infinite. You know the feeling when you're falling asleep and you catch yourself? I was playing, actually what I began to play with was, and you can play with it, was the feeling of this is where I end. This is where my tissue, my skin, my bones end. And this is where air, so to speak, begins. I wanted to feel when I hit that. I wanted to actually feel the actual moment when that one becomes the other, because in the reality I am this and I am this, right? And so I began to play with the feeling of falling into the infinite, where you don't catch yourself. So it's what we talked about yesterday, the softening. I was talking about, when you're in pain, you contract. And if you can release and begin to allow it to soften, you can focus in on where the core, for instance, where a core pain is, and begin to work with it very directly. It was also the reflection of the fact that part of my practice that I've been given has been to learn to live without any security or any stability, and to just try. It was because it's about trust. And how change, that whole idea of, the outside, okay, we have a house, we have a job, we have all of these things, it's stable. I have a very, very dear friend who has had 3 amazing tragedies. Her husband was killed in a plane crash. She was in the tsunami in Sri Lanka, and then she was in the earthquake in L'Aquila in Italy above Rome, and lost everything. And she's recovered from all these things with incredible love and fortitude. But we were together. I was teaching in Italy, and we were together, and it was the first time she had come into a training since the earthquake. And we were sitting at these big dinners that we have, with the group in Italy, and it's always marvelous, and the food's always marvelous. And she was on one side of the room, and I was on the other, and at one point we just looked over at each other, and we knew in that moment, we were both totally aware that at any moment this could all change, and that consciousness wasn't there, And that's really what it is living somehow with the willingness to allow that change, and then it gives you an experience of another level of reality.
Is that something that you teach people, or that's just something that informs your work?
Think about it. Does anyone actually want to learn that? You know what I mean? If you say, listen, I'm going to teach you what total instability feels like. You're like, I don't want to know that. So no, this is something that I use. This is what I use. This is my practice. That's my practice. And then the process of sharing it with the world, for instance, by writing. That was the information I was given a couple of years ago. I thought, what am I supposed to be doing? And it was very clear. You need to start telling people what you do, what your practice is. And I'm like, well, I didn't think it was such a big deal, But again, then I discovered that it's different.
So I wanted to share about the experience that I had with you. Actually, the very first time that I had a session with you.
At the house?
At the house, yeah. I had this sort of ongoing, like always nagging sort of a discomfort in the left.
You're talking about the Trager
side.
session.
Yeah,
more or
it was
less.
supposed to be a Trager session. But when I got on the table, I think what happened was really quite different. For me, it was quite different. And because we really went into like the imagination stuff a lot, which is really a fun place to play, but not a place that I've been taken or joined along with by any Trager practitioner that I had ever worked with before. So we started to do this thing, and I can't remember really all the details except that at some point laying there, you said, well, tell me what it looks like. And I said, well, it's sort of like shaped like a diamond, like a marquee shape. And I described the color, and and you just kept asking me questions about it, and then it was clear that we were both feeling it and seeing it. It became really clear to me that I could tell what her hands were doing, that she knew exactly where it was. We were both following its path. And actually, Debbie and Rick were in the room watching. So it was like, there were 4 of us in the room, and I was sort of broadcasting this experience that was happening in my body. And I had this, like, a moment of, like, oh my God, that's the shape of my mother's engagement ring. Do you remember this?
Yes, thank you.
So I just said that because it was so, like, remarkable to me that that's what came. And my parents were divorced when I was young, but I always remember when I discovered my mother's engagement ring somewhere, or maybe she wore it and then suddenly she wasn't wearing it. I don't remember, but I remember the ring. And having been married twice, I had 2 emerald-shaped stones. I always wanted an emerald-shaped stone. And I was laying there on the table and feeling this it was sort of a weird, like, shock, and then a recognition of my repulsion of the marquee-shaped ring. Like that whenever I was asked to pick out the ring, that I would not choose that shape.
Yeah.
Absolutely would not choose that shape. So we continued to work, and over a period of time, it changed. The experience of my body changed, the feeling changed, the shape changed, and it became round. And, which of course was the only shape I hadn't had.
Are you listening?
So I sort of remarked that it was round, and I thought, well, if I was going to get engaged again, I would want a round stone. And none of this, I think, meant really anything to anybody in the room, but it was pretty profound to me on the table. And I was laying there, and I was trying to feel it and see it and talk about it. And when the session was over, I opened my eyes, and there on the wall, I don't know if it's visible, but there was a picture of a rose, and I think this might be the picture.
Yeah, that is.
So it was just this picture of this rose sitting up on the wall, and I looked up, and that was the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes, and I said, that's it. That was it. That was what I saw inside of me. And the pain was gone. Never has come back. And it was really just this remarkable, easy, fun experience in imagination.
Yes.